During the late 1980s and early 1990s, Abdolkarim Soroush has become one of the leading intellectuals in Iranian religious discourse, emphasizing a flexible interpretation of Islam. His graduate education in philosophy of science during the 1970s in England made him distinguished from his contemporaries because of his analytical perspective. Moreover, his ability to speak the dominant religious language of Iranian politics made him a dangerous critic of the clerical establishment. His domestic legitimacy increased when Ayatollah Khomeini appointed him to the Advisory Council of the Cultural Revolution, in the early years of the revolution. The election of Mohammad Khatami as the president of Iran in 1997 changed the critical position of Abdolkarim Soroush. After the election of Mohammad Khatami, reformist forces gained momentum, and Abdolkarim Soroush has become a leading figure in this new reformist discourse. His knowledge of religious texts, and his ability to speak poetically, made Abdolkarim Soroush a distinguished intellectual figure in Iran's emerging critical discourse. His criticism is based on the idea that there is not complete and final understanding of Islam. Therefore, any attempt to formulate an official Islamic political ideology is futile and nonsense. Instead, Abdolkarim Soroush supports establishing a democratic state in Iran, in which the clerical establishment has no superior political power, and Iran has a continuous and open cultural dialogue with the world.
Fundamentalism took hold with a fury and a force that helped ignite the still impoverished masses in Iran, who felt they had little reason to be grateful to the Shah. The fabulous profits from oil had not filtered down to them. Autumn 19...
As a pen name of Hossein Dabba, Abdolkarim Soroush was born in Tehran in 1945. After finishing the Alavi Secondary School, which had graduated several members of the Islamic Republic, Abdolkarim Soroush got his bachelor's degree in pharmacology in Tehran. In the mid-1970s, Soroush left Iran to continue his graduate education in analytical chemistry in England. During his graduate education, Soroush also studied philosophy of science along with Persian poetry and the Quranic exegesis. Because of his religious critique of Iranian leftists and Marxist discourse, Abdolkarim Soroush had become a powerful intellectual. Shortly after the revolution in 1979, Soroush returned to Iran to take up the directorship of the Islamic Culture Group within the Tehran Teachers Training College. Later, he became a high-ranking member of the Advisory Council of the Cultural Revolution in Tehran by the direct appointment of Ayatollah Khomeini. Because of his earlier anti-Marxist writings, Abdolkarim Soroush was given a privileged position as the Islamic Republic's ideologue. This particular period of his life marks substantial controversy, owing to the Cultural Revolution's role in the closure of Iran's universities and the restriction of free speech and academic inquiry. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, however, Soroush started to investigate the process of change in the interpretation of religious texts. But this series of investigations had sparked continuous controversies and leading to the closure of the journal in which the investigations first appeared. Soroush was banned from teaching, writing, traveling, and public speaking because of his criticisms of the impossibility of any final interpretation of Islam and his denial of any practical role for religion in politics.
Descended on the area after learning that the 78-year-old Muslim leader would return to Iran Friday after a 15-year exile. In a speech lasting about...
I'm here with Abdolkarim Soroush, a native from Iran and one of the most influential liberal Islamic thinkers. Welcome. at the German Development Institute.
For Abdolkarim Soroush, to meet the challenges of modernity, Muslims should seek not to change their religion but rather to reconcile their understanding of religion with changes in the outside world. This clearly requires a conception of religion that accepts the inevitability of change in the human understanding of religion. According to Soroush, religious knowledge is the product of scholars engaged in the study of the unchanging core of Shia Islamic texts. These scholars can interpret the texts differently, depending on their methodology. In addition to the use of particular methods for the study of religion, a scholar of religion also possesses a distinct understanding of the world, nature, and a Muslim's place in both. For Soroush, religious knowledge changes and evolves over time, as more comprehensive understandings replace previous, more limited interpretations. But all interpretations are bound by the era in which a religious scholar lives and by the degree of advancement of the human sciences in general and religious studies in specific within this era. In brief, Abdolkarim Soroush argues that any understanding of religion is time-bound and religious knowledge is created by the application of the knowledge of the day to the core religious texts. Therefore, any religious knowledge is formed and developed by religious scholars. Soroush cautions against confusing religion itself with the knowledge gained from the study of it. Religious knowledge as a human construct necessarily and constantly changes. Hence, Muslims can reconstruct their religious interpretations in accordance with their changing understanding of their world.
But most of them are hesitant to talk in front of foreign cameras, scarce in the country since elections last June.
Iran's former president, Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani,
Abdolkarim Soroush calls for the abandonment of Islamic ideology altogether, arguing that it hinders the growth of religious knowledge. For Soroush, religiously derived methods of governance are insufficient for administering a modern state. He rejects any government that claims legitimacy based on the implementation of Islamic methods of governance. Instead, Abdolkarim Soroush considers a democratic government the only kind compatible with his notion of Islam because only a democratic government can overcome social and political obstacles to the proper growth of religious knowledge. According to Soroush, religious ideology reduces the complexity of religion to a fixed ideological worldview, but it is impossible at any time to defend one understanding of Islam as definitive because all understandings change over time. The use of religion as a political tool subordinates the depth and complexity of religious understandings to the imperatives of a temporary political struggle. Soroush, on the other hand, argues that one of the conditions for the growth of religious knowledge is the acceptance of transformation and evolution in religious understandings. But the articulation of an official religious ideology restricts an individual's freedom to interpret religion. A government that rules by one official interpretation of religion, and demands that its citizens live according to this interpretation, sacrifices human rights for ideological purity. The guiding criteria for governance, however, must be human rights. For Soroush, if a government defends human rights, it also defends religion, as a just understanding of religion incorporates human rights. In brief, Abdolkarim Soroush argues that the restricted range of free thought and rational inquiry in a religiously ideological state impedes not only the natural growth of religious knowledge but also the continued development of the state and society. As is clear, Soroush emphasizes the negative impact of state-allied religious ideologues on the growth of religious knowledge as well as the continuous development of the state and society.